Hello everybody, this is Larry with Great Lakes e-bikes. Today we are breaking down the most important things that you need to know if you're shopping for an e-bike. Now we've got tons of examples here to break down, motor size, battery size, what kind of circuitry you should look at, all of that stuff that might seem complex. We're gonna put it into simple to understand words and just break down the differences and what bikes have what. And you could just come in or know where to start your search. So at the very least, you'll leave here just confident knowing what to type in on Google. So to get started, we're gonna start with probably the most basic e-bike, and it's something that probably has either a 250 watt to 350 watt motor. So a good example for one of those smaller motors is this Nakto Classic. It's something that it's not going to be torquey, it's not going to get you the wind blowing back in your face right away, but eventually it will catch up to the speed of any other bike, just not as fast. Now usually these don't come equipped with a bunch of different levels of power assist, and we'll get into that when we get into the more complex bikes. But if you're looking for something, just a simple way to get out more and you don't want to break the bank, something like this is perfect because, like I said, you got that 350 watt motor that can eventually pick up speed, but it's not going to give you too much power that you're afraid to ride your bike. The battery also, I believe this one is something like 10 amp hours, and what that means, it's going to give you just enough range to go on probably 5 to 10 mile cruises, nothing crazy. But when you get the smaller batteries like this, you might look at that as a downside, but it really saves cost because when you're shopping for an e-bike, the battery is sometimes, more than often, the most expensive thing you're buying in the bike. E-bike batteries can range from $300 all the way up to $600 and more. So that is really what you're paying for here. And this is a perfectly adequate battery for someone who is doing some casual riding. And maybe it's your first e-bike, you don't know what to expect. There's nothing wrong with looking at something like this because it does the job. It's still very fun. It's just not for the people chasing the high speed, crazy, wild stuff, which we'll get into later. Not that it's too crazy, but if you're looking for a casual ride, definitely check out something in the 350 watt range because it's very easy to handle. Now up next, this is a Addmotor Citypro. And I absolutely love this bike. And in fact, I think 500 watt e-bikes are underrated. Now, most advertised, in fact, the most that we're allowed to sell here in Michigan is a 750 watt e-bike. But the thing is, a lot of those are often gated by the rules and regulations to not actually use the full power, whereas the 500 watt motors often perform very similarly. Plus, they're a little bit more affordable, and all said and done, I definitely recommend coming in, trying a 500 and a 750 watt. The only real difference is you're going to get a little more torque out of the 750. And there's definitely bikes where you want more torque, like some of our outdoor adventure bikes, like for hunting and stuff, you're going to want that big motor. But something that you're riding on the road, there's nothing wrong with a 500 watt motor here. And another thing, remember what I said about the batteries earlier. This is set up with one of the best batteries on the market. I believe this is a 20 amp hour battery that uses Samsung cells, and that paired with this, here's what it's going to do. The battery quality is going to last for a lot more cycles. That amp hour number, if you are really looking for something that's going to have longevity and you're really going to be riding it and you want a lot of range, look at the amp hours. Look at something at a minimum of probably 15, especially if you're going to be a heavy rider. That's going to get you the range that you hope for, and it's going to get you the cycles. You're going to get more and more cycles out of the battery. So that's again why we stock Addmotor. They've recently shifted to very high quality, very high amp hour batteries. Now again, Samsung cells, 20 amp hours. All said and done, if you're using pedal assist on this particular model, I think you can get up to 100, if not more, miles of range. Again, that's using pedal assist. If you're using throttle only, something closer to 50, but 50 miles of range is still incredible. Like, I mean, that's a long ride. So definitely am excited about this particular model. I'm gonna throw one other 500 watt into this conversation. There's another popular bike by Aventon here. Now this is the Pace 500. And now it's almost a brother or a sister to the bike I just showed you. You're gonna have a lot of fun on this. A nice step through design. This one also has a pretty good battery that's built into the frame. And again, just because if you're looking on paper, one says 500 versus 750, I definitely recommend coming to a store, coming to our store, ride them and feel the difference, because something like this 500 watt motor is actually, it's pretty incredible. I definitely recommend trying it out. In fact, I would say the 500 is the perfect blend for, I'd say someone who bikes often and it's maybe their first e-bike and they're looking to have a little of both worlds. Maybe they're going to be doing pedal assist, which of course is when you're pedaling and then the motor is giving you assist while you're pedaling. It's a perfect bike for those folks, because there's this thing called ghost pedaling, which I'll quickly explain. And it's when your motor gives off too much power that you run out of gears and then you just pedal into nothing because the motor is doing too much work. Whereas if you really want to be getting exercise, you're going on long rides, a 500 watt motor has a lot less ghost pedaling. And all said and done, if you're looking for a rideable bike, I really recommend checking out a 500 watt. All right, the last motor type we should talk about is the 750. Now, again, I know I just said how great the 500 is, but again, there's nothing wrong with a little extra power, as long as that's something you are prepared for. Now, often when you do go with a 750 watt motor, they're a bit torquier, so you do want to make sure that's something that you're comfortable with, because let me tell you, these Addmotors, they got a kick to them, which, you know, someone like me, that's what I go for. I want something that's going to have a little more power, it's going to go fast, and it's going to go quick. And you're going to get that when you pair, again, a really nice battery, something with, like I said, 15 minimum amp hours, and then a 750 watt motor is almost the perfect combination all the time. Normally these videos we'd talk about the volt, is it a 48 volt or whatever. Honestly, if it's not 48 volt, it's probably not made within the last 2 or 3 years, because everyone's shifting to that. So that should be a no-brainer when you're shopping for a bike. At minimum, if it's 500 watts, it's going to need to be on a 48 volt system. So again, the 750 watt, if I had to break it down, you're going to it's going to be a necessity on a big adventure bike like this, which is actually called the Adventure from Aventon, but a fat tire bike, something where the bike is really heavy, it's going to need that extra torque to get it going, because if you got the heavy bike plus a heavy rider, you need a big motor. And that brings me right into these trikes we stock as well. They're going to have a 750 watt motor, because I mean, these things are big. They're big and they're prepared to hold a big rider too. So you need a big, powerful 750 watt motor. Now, the last thing I'll say about these motors, they have a peak often of 1,000 to roughly 1,200 wattage. And what that means, it's going to built into the controlling system. It's going to throttle you at about 20 miles no matter what. But when you have the capability to go to that 1,000 range, you can handle heavy riders, you can crush hills. So if it's a really steep hill, it's going to be nothing towards the bike. So again, if you're really doing hard work, it's a no-brainer. You got to go with the 750 watt motor. If you're going on the street and you're just having a casual time, the 500 watt, save some money, find a really well done 500 watt bike like this Citypro here. All right, hopefully you're still with me now. We're done with all the technical stuff, but there's other things that you should definitely consider when buying an e-bike. There's 3 or 4 more things I want to touch on here. So things like the display, things like the levels of power assist. What does that even mean? We want to get into that, and then very briefly we'll touch on like mechanical things like, do you want hydraulic brakes? Do you want front suspension? Do you want rear suspension? Like, do you even, like, we'll break down what those mean and if it's something you even need to consider. So first thing I'd like to talk about is the display, as I just mentioned. I think I found 3 perfect lineups for you to see. Now, I mentioned that very, I guess I'd say cheaper model bike with the lower power. You don't need a crazy screen. Something like this is on the Nakto. Hopefully you can see that all right. Now, while it's nothing crazy, it still has everything you need and more. So you got your speed, you got your level of power you have left, you have your assist amount, and you have your odometer. Those are going to be the core things you need, and it's a good time. I might as well tell you about the power assist and how that works while we're here. Some bikes have 10 levels, some bikes have 4 levels, some have 5, but really what that means, it's just the way the bike throttles the amount of power that it's going to let the motor give you. So if you are on level 1, it's probably going to max your speed out around 5-10 miles an hour, and then every time you push up, you'll see that level goes up and up until this bike has 5 levels, and at 5 it's going to let you use the full power, and when you pedal it's going to give it everything it's got. So maybe you want to hang out at 3, and then when you get to a hill you turn it up to 5 so you have the power to make it up. You can use that, and then most bikes, especially every bike we have here, is going to have a throttle because, I mean, it's just fun. Let's be for real. Sometimes you want to go on a really hard ride, and then maybe you just want to cruise the whole way home without having to touch the pedals. We let you do that with every bike we sell here. So I'll go ahead and turn this off and then show you the next level, which I would skip ahead to an Addmotor bike over here. So now the next level up I'm showing you is the Addmotor. Again, this is that Citypro we were looking at. Now you're still not going to have a color screen, but you are going to have a lot more functionality. We can go through as you can see, the PAS stands for pedal assist. We can go up to 5 on this bike. Actually, yeah, Addmotors are going up to 7 now. And what's cool is it kind of breaks down what it means. So you can see at 7 it says speed, you're going to be going fast. At 6 it says power, 5 it says power, 4 it says standard, and then 2 you're in eco mode. That's where you're going to get the 100+ miles of range I mentioned before. So you have, again, those are your pedal assists. Something like this takes it to the next level where you actually have blinkers too. So if I do the right blinker here, you can see on the display it shows that I have my right blinker going. And you can see back here, I'm displaying a right blinker. Again, riding in the city, that's where, well, it's why it probably has its name of the Citypro. We'll click that button again. Oops, I hit the horn. You simply just tap that again and it will take it off the screen. But yeah, this is that next level, gives you a little more detail, a little bit larger in display so you can see clear everything you know. And what's cool about this one too, if you can see this down here, there's actually a little USB port so you can have your phone set up while you're riding too. You get a little phone mount for the side right here, keep it plugged in, keep your phone charged. Not a bad touch. And then finally, let's look at our friend the Aventon bike back here. Now this is that Aventon Adventure. And it's worth showing this guy off because it's one of the few out on the market. You're seeing more and more, but a lot of people are trying to shift to these color displays. And while it's not a deal breaker for someone like me, it is nice because I believe this one pairs to an app on your phone, which gives you a little more flexibility to set your presets. We'll show that in another video. But it's just a little more high tech at the end of the day. But really, you are getting the exact same information you were getting on the other bikes we showed you. It's just cleaner. It's a little more high tech, I'd say, and it's just that kind of that premium push that some of these bikes offer. But again, I wouldn't call that a deal breaker. So it's good to know that you can have it, but it's not necessarily something you need when shopping for a new electric bike. Again, I'll go through. You got your levels of pedal assist at the bottom. And then you got your odometer, your speed, your battery level, let you know if your headlight's on. Everything's going to be here on this color display. There is a phone charging port on this one too. Good to know. So that's a breakdown of the displays. And while I'm over here, it's worth talking about hydraulic versus non-hydraulic brakes. Now, most e-bikes, I mean, almost every bike we sell is going to have disc brakes, which when you're going at high speeds, you're going to want reliable disc brakes with nice resin pads that will stop you and keep you safe. Now, the breakdown though from there is mechanical versus hydraulics. Now, we've had a lot of customers who prefer the hydraulic because they have a nice soft touch. People with arthritis or hand issues too, they tend to lean more with the hydraulic because it's a cushier, more natural stopping feeling. And then when you shift over to the mechanical, it's not like a bad thing. In fact, the bike I ride every day still has mechanical brakes, and that's totally fine with me. It really comes down to a preference thing. Again, you're not really losing anything. You're just getting a bit better experience with the hydraulics. Although, again, that's another thing that will set the price point up. But again, I wouldn't necessarily call it a deal breaker for myself because, again, there's nothing wrong with the mechanical brakes. Although, I mean, the hydraulics are definitely a little bit better. They're kind of a set it and forget it. Maybe once every 2 years you might need to bleed the brakes and get it set up. Whereas, yeah, you might stretch your cable a little bit more, but it's you know, it's really a fair trade-off, I'd say. Nothing wrong with the mechanical. But, you know, if you're really looking for that high-end experience, just go ahead and go with the hydraulic because you won't regret it. All right, and now we're towards the end here, but there's a couple tiny just list of features that I think is worth mentioning when you're shopping. We're going to break down, to end this, is a step-through versus a straight bar design. And then we're going to talk about wheel sizes and what you should shop for. But before we do that, I'll simply show you the fact that some of our bikes even fold. In fact, a lot of e-bikes on the market are leaning towards this. Now, this is a folding fat tire bike. And in fact, we stock about 5 different types of these folding fat tire bikes because they are so popular. But what they do is almost all of them will fold at the handlebars. That'll come down, and then it'll also fold in half here. So if you don't want to buy a bike rack, you can definitely just store it in your car, take it up to your apartment, whatever you need to do. It's got a lot of versatility, but you still have like all the functions of a normal bike. Now, don't let the folding mechanism make you think anything less about the capabilities. I prefer a folding bike because they do have this nice, easy on and off design. This one has that powerful motor, that 750 watt I mentioned before. They're just a lot of fun, so definitely recommend giving one a try. I think while we're here, let's go ahead and mention that difference that I was talking about before of a step-through versus straight bar design. Now, obviously, it's kind of self-explanatory, but in case you're new, there's step-through, which allow you to step through to get on, which is very easy. And then there's some straight bars. Here's actually a great example. Here's a straight bar adventure here. You can see there's a bar here, and some people prefer this design. And then this is the exact same bike without it, which we'd call a step through. And again, it's just, these are a little bit easier to get on, get off. So that's a good breakdown of these, but there are variations of it. So the Citypro that I keep going back to is what we're calling a mid-step, where it's still got a step-through design, but you know, it has to be sturdy, it has to house the battery, so it's not as low as some of the other bikes, but still very easy to get on. And then we look at its competitor over here, the Pace, which has a bit more of a step through here. So there's a lot of different variations of these, but it's good to know, like, hey, I know I definitely want something easy to get on. Then you're going to want to be searching for a step through. All right, I know this video is getting long, but the final thing we should talk about here, we're gonna go over tire size and who should be buying what type of tires. And then finally, we're gonna talk about accessories. Let's actually talk about that first, because we get a lot of people who come in and maybe they don't like something like a seat, or they love this bike, but it doesn't come with a rack, whereas this one comes with a rack. I would say don't let those be deal breakers when purchasing your bike. You want to find the right comfort in things like the motor and battery and the geometry and the way you actually like feel on the bike more than anything else, because those you can't change. But something like a seat, adding a rack, all of that stuff can be added later, and they're really never that expensive. You can add front racks, you can add rear racks. All of that stuff is changeable, whereas things like swapping out a motor is not only expensive, but it's challenging to do. So you're gonna want to make sure you get that stuff down before you let something like a seat be the deal breaker in your purchase. So the last thing, I promise this is the last thing we'll talk about, is tire size. We'll start with the smallest. So up here, this is the Aventon Solterra. This is really trying to mimic a road bike, something with around 1-inch tire diameter. This is for going fast on the road. Now this thing is very light, it's quick, it's got a 500-watt motor, it's got a lower gear stance than most bikes, and it's quick, like I said, because of these tires. Now it's not off-road, it's actually the opposite of off-road worthy. You just want to keep this on the road, but can go very long distances, and it's just made to emulate a road bike. Very light. In fact, it's under 50 pounds. Moving up in size, you have something like this, which we'll call kind of a hybrid tire, even though if you look at the treads on something like this Pace, this is definitely made for the road, but because it's got a thicker width, it's actually going to give you a little more cushion while you ride, and it's also going to be semi-flexible if you hit like dirt trails or whatever. I don't recommend it if you're doing a lot of dirt trails, of course. But for your simple, just everyday road riding, this is that next level of cushion and comfort that you won't feel, where on something like this bike, you're gonna feel every bump. Now the next step up, now this is a road tire with a bit more tread. This is that Citypro again. Very, very similar. In fact, you probably would barely notice the difference between this and the smoother Aventon tire, but because this has a little more texture here, you're going to be able to take it semi-off-road. Plus, this has front suspension, which really most of the bikes we have here have very similar suspension setups. So really just, if you're doing anything kind of off-roady, it does not hurt to get a bike with some front suspension. So then you have your fat tire, which is how we'll end this video here. There's two big pros. Now some people think, well, I'm not going off-road, I don't need a fat tire. But let me tell you, again, the personal bike I've ride almost every day is a fat tire, and I don't go off-road with it, but it's good to know, if needed, that you have it. So there's a lot of tread. You can take turns a little more aggressively. Believe it or not, it still has a decent amount of like nimbleness, even though it's a thicker tire. Sure, not as much as a smaller tire, but I think you get a great feel of everything, and you're just prepared. If you're on the beach, you let your air out and you go on the sand. Hell, I've even taken some of these snow biking. You just, again, let your air out and have fun in the snow. So you're gonna have more options if you go with a fat tire. And I steer most people to at least consider a fat tire, only because they're just as much fun on the road as they are off the road, and you have more options. Not only that, paired with front suspension and that thicker diameter tire, it's going to be a nice cushier ride, because this is going to absorb all the cracks and bumps for you, so your back isn't feeling it. All right, I know we went over a lot today. I'm sure there's things that I didn't even touch on, like the different types of front suspension and things like that. But that's all the more reason to find your local e-bike store. If it's us, definitely come in, say hey. I mean, look at, we even have things like this, which is basically a moped that you could pedal. Like, there's so many options on the market that you just got to come in and ride for yourself. And at a place like Great Lakes E-Bikes here, we can explain the difference, let you try them all, and find your perfect pair. So don't hesitate to give us a call or an email, or fill out the chat on our website. Someone will be there to answer your questions. So appreciate you watching this very long and detailed video. Give us a thumbs up, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye, friends.